Hey folks, Ozzy Rob here again with another brake job we're going to be doing today. This is my 2018 Ford Expedition Limited. So, been driving around now and I got about 70 plus thousand miles on the vehicle right now, and the steering wheel is starting to shudder a lot when hitting the brakes, especially at higher speeds, which is indicative of the front rotors being warped. So we're going to be replacing the front rotors and the front pads. And we're also going to be showing you the parts that are needed. And I like brakeperformance.com. They have a really nice setup for dimpled and slotted rotors, which is a lifetime guarantee on warping. And I'll explain that to you a little bit more. And I'll show you what I purchased. And we'll get this job going on. So stay tuned. Okay, in preparation for replacing the brakes and rotors, let's get the truck jacked up and jack stands installed. And one thing I like about Ford with this particular vehicle, there's no guesswork on where to put your lifting point. They have an arrow pointer right to where you need to lift it. So, and there's also one in the back too if you ever need to do any work on the back brakes or anything to lift the back end up. But there's a nice arrow there to show you where you put your lift point for your jack. And then of course, once we get it up, we have our jack stand under our one cross member for support. So we're going to get the other side jacked up and a safety stand installed, and then we will start our brake rotor and replacement in the front project. Okay, so this is what we're going to be installing from brakeperformance.com. I got two of these premium dimpled, not drilled all the way through, and slotted rotors, which is especially made for high heat and high braking performance. A set of pads, and of course the guide hardware for the pads. One thing I have to say is that this whole thing with the two rotors, the pads, and all the mounting hardware was $386. Which you may think that's a lot, why don't you just get stock? But this has a lifetime guarantee. And when I mean a lifetime guarantee, let me just explain on how brakeperformance.com honors it. I had these same type of rotors on my old 2002 Ford Excursion, and I had about 80,000 miles on those rotors before they went bad. And that was 10 years after purchase. So I gave them a call and I talked to the representative, and they had a problem finding the rotors because they changed the stock number. So once they found the stock number, they still honored their word and gave me two replacement rotors free of charge and free of shipping. You can't beat that. And like I said, all this is all lifetime. So if you want to spend a little extra money and don't have to worry about ever buying these parts again, please go to brakeperformance.com. They have brakes for almost every vehicle you could possibly imagine. So let's move on and let's get this installed. Oh, one thing I want to mention here too, that the new rotor has two little areas for jacking bolts in case the rotors would get stuck on the hub. You can put two jacking bolts in there and lift it up. And then plus, as you can see, this is a really nice rotor. Heavy duty performance. You can see here on the rotor itself how it has been machined in a cross pattern for proper pad break-in. So this is a great purchase, well worth the money. So let's get it installed. Okay, so here are the tools and lubricants that we're going to be needing for replacing the front brakes and rotor on my 2018 Ford Expedition. Got an impact gun with a 13/16 for the lug bolts to take off. I got a couple torque wrenches that you see here. I got 2 foot-pounds. This one right here is going to be used to retorque the wheel lugs when they get reinstalled, and that's going to be like around 150 foot-pounds for the wheel lugs. And also we're going to be using this for the caliper mounting bracket, which is going to get torqued to about 148 foot-pounds. The smaller one is for the caliper guide pin, the bolts that support the actual caliper, and this is going to be set for 42 foot-pounds. I have my trusty tool here. Like I said, you get this from Amazon. This is really clutch for retracting the pistons, especially since this is a dual piston caliper. It makes sure that both pistons retract evenly when you go to use it. And it's a simple ratchet action, which we'll show you a bit later on. Got a 10 millimeter little ratchet, 10 millimeter socket on there, and that is going to remove the brake line mounting bolt. So we'll show that a little bit later. Screwdriver in case you need to remove the boot for lubrication on the guide pins for the caliper. And then of course we have a 21 millimeter which fits perfectly for the caliper mounting bracket bolts, but you could use a 13/16 as well, but this is a little tight, so I would recommend going with this. And you wonder what the heck is this for? Well, you got to work with what you got here. So anyhow, I use this to actually retract the caliper pistons a little bit, so it makes it easier to lift the whole caliper off once I get all the bolts and everything removed. And of course, got some WD-40, got some white lithium for lubricating the brake parts, brake quiet for the anti-squeal put on the back of the pads, and some high temperature never seize. So let's get the tire off and let's get busy. So before doing any brake job, it's always a good idea for the master cylinder reservoir just to loosen it up a little bit, just so when you start retracting the piston, the fluid can come back up a little easier, and just make sure that the air gets pushed out and you have no issues with that. And of course, I can't leave nothing alone, so I got this cool air intake, so I just had to show that. But this thing sounds great here, nice turbo whine. But that's a story for another day. So let's carry on. Okay, now you see what I'm using this clamp for. So basically what I'm doing here, I have the clamp on the pin of the floating caliper, and here is the actual caliper mounting bracket. And so what I'm going to be doing the upper and then lower, and then basically I'm just going on there and just going to squeeze it. And as you can see, it's just retracting that piston just a little bit that I need, so everything pulls off nicely. So I'm going to do the same on the bottom, and then we'll proceed with getting this caliper removed. Okay, to give us a little bit more room for removing the caliper, we have this 10mm bolt right here, which is the brake line mounting bracket. So we're going to be removing that. And this right here is like one of your speed sensors pickups that goes down for your ABS, but you don't have to undo this one. All you got to do is just give it a little squeeze with your thumb, and that puts it in this, gets it right out of the way. So we're going to get this removed and get that out of the way. And then right here is our caliper pin mounting bolts down here and here, and these are 1/2 inch, so we're going to use a 1/2 inch socket with a ratchet to remove those. And since I use my clamp to compress the piston a little bit, this thing should pop right out. Okay, so now that we got our 1/2 inch caliper pin bolts removed, and like I said, since we use that clamp to compress this pistons back a little bit, try to do this one-handed, but a little wiggle, and you can see it just pops right out as such. So I'm gonna set this right up here for right now, and I'm gonna get my piston retracting tool and to retract the pistons. Okay, so removal of the old brake pads is very simple. Once you get the caliper removed, just pull and drop out. And here on the inner, pull, and it's out. So what we're going to do here, we're going to use this to help us retract the pistons when we get our piston tool installed. Okay, now that we got our caliper piston retraction tool installed, as you can see here, this is a really nice setup that you can probably get on Amazon. But you can see how where it has like this little plate where the pad goes onto, and then it goes onto the inner pad, and there's a ratchet action in there. So basically all we got to do now is just ratchet these pistons, let them retract all the way back. See if you get a little better view maybe. And it works great to just retract the pistons all the way back. And then it will be ready for when we come time to install our new pads. So I'm going to stop and continue on because it's better to do this with 2 hands. Okay, so just one thing to be mindful of as you're retracting the piston. Your brake fluid level is going to rise in your reservoir. So if by chance, if you did fill this thing up to your maximum limit before changing the brakes, you might have a mess because it's going to fill up and it's going to come out the top and go all over the place. So as you're retracting those pistons, just keep an eye on it. And if you see it starting to get into the point where it might overflow, get like a turkey baster or some type of syringe, and then just suck the brake fluid out so you have plenty of room for the additional volume that you're pushing back when retracting the pistons. Okay, so you can see right now I have both pistons fully retracted and evenly done on the caliper, and I have a piece of heavy gauge mechanical wire just hanging the caliper off of the spring assembly. Just because you don't want it hanging on a brake line, because you might stress it, you might tear it, so you don't want to replace the brake line. So just support the caliper. And then I got my 21mm impact. I got 2 caliper mounting bracket bolts, one on the bottom here, one on the top here, and we're going to buzz that off, and this whole bracket should just pop right off, and then the rotor should just pop right off as well, since this is what's keeping the rotor from popping out. Okay, now you see we got the caliper mounting brackets removed, so this right here just pops right off, and the rotor should just come right off as well. A little wiggle, and we are off. Okay, one thing I want to show you, this is the actual caliper mounting bracket, and this right here is the actual caliper slide pins that the caliper actually bolts onto. These pins, they should move freely and it should pull right out, but as you can see here, it almost seems like it's seized inside, even though it turns, but it won't pull out because there's probably some rust settlement inside of there that is prevented from pulling it out. So, the little trick that I do to free this up is that I just lift the boot up, and once I have the boot lifted up, I get some WD-40 sprayed inside on the pin. Make sure you get lubrication all the way around. Move it around a little bit, let it sit for a few minutes, and then I get a vice grip, as you can see that I did on this one right here. Same thing, had the boot lifted up, lubricated it, let it sit for a few minutes, move it around. And this with a piece of wood and a plywood, once it moves around for a little extra leverage, just give it a little pull, and it's gonna be tight, but you can see it is coming out. And then once it comes out, it's probably gonna rotate a little bit, but then there you go. All we gotta do now is clean it, re-lubricate it with white lithium, and we'll be good to go for reinstalling and having these pins move freely as they should be. Okay, so once we get these caliper mounting pins off the caliper bracket, just get yourself like a little swab and just get in there and just clean up any junk, any rust, anything that could be in there, making sure the whole thing is smooth. Maybe spray a little bit of WD-40 in there, but you want to make sure, if you do, you want to blow it out with air, because if you leave a gap, if you leave any liquid in there, it's not going to let the pin go all the way down. So you can see with this one right here, this was our first problem child. And you can see right now, it's all lubricated with the white lithium, and look how nice this thing just moves now. It is just very, very smooth, and it's going to operate correctly now. And it's not seized up anymore. Okay, so to put in the new guides for the pads, which are right here, it's simply enough on the calibrator bracket. You can see I left one of the old ones. I did 3 already because it's hard to do this one-handed. But basically, you just can get a screwdriver on the side of it here, if you can see it a little bit better, and give it a little pry, and it just pop right out. And then, of course, the new ones itself, you want to make sure that you have this little key part here on the inside of the bracket, and this spring part, which is locks on the outside. And then you would just put it in like this, and then with your thumb just snap it in. But like I said, I got to hold the bracket. But anyhow, that's how they would go on. They go on very simple. Okay, and final step before putting this caliper mounting bracket back on the vehicle, just get a little white lithium on the new guys you just installed. Just a little dab will do you. Put some on your finger or rub it on there, and that would help keep things moving smoothly with the pads as well. And one thing I like to use with all my brake jobs, on the back of the pads, I always put disc brake quiet on to help with this anti-squealing. Just spray it on, liberal on all of the pads, let it sit for about 5 minutes till it gets tacky, and then they're ready to be installed. And one other thing I like to mention before putting these in, of course, factory brake pads don't have this, but with these brakeperformance.com, as you can see here, this will be the inner pad, because you see it has two little humps. That's going to be for the piston. It gives it more surface area for better application of the pad. And then, of course, this will be your outer. So I just wanted to point that out to you if you're using these pads. But if you get regular factory pads, they won't have this. So brakeperformance.com just did a little bit better. Make the surface area a little bit wider for better pressure and even application of the brake pad. Okay, so before putting the new rotor on, I always like getting my high temperature never sees, and then just putting a lot around that inner hub area, because that helps for any time you got to remove the rotor next time. And also just put some right here on the studs. A little lubrication always helps. Let's get this new rotor installed. Okay, with the new rotor installed, what I always like doing is that I get one of the lug nuts and I just put it on, tight, just to hold the rotor in place so it stays steady as I'm putting the caliper mounting bracket and the caliper back on. One thing with these dimpled and slotted rotors, I always like to have the direction of the slot going in the direction of the tire. I just have a feeling that I think that it helps with removing the brake dust because it slings it out instead of slinging it in. So, but anyhow, that's the direction I like to have them in. I know some people might like having them the other way, but I always had great success with the slots and the dimples going into the forward direction of the tire. So let's get this caliper mounting bracket looked at and then installed, and we'll carry on. Okay, I got the caliper mounting bracket back installed. I have the upper and lower bolts installed, and they get torqued to 148. So make sure you use the torque wrench and get everything set. Go pull. Okay, we're good there. And let's go to this bottom one here. Forgive me, I'm doing this one-handed. Okay, we are torqued up. Caliper mounted bracket is installed. So now let's get the caliper reinstalled. And the new pads, they just sit right in. And then the caliper drops over top of it. We'll put our caliper mounting bolts in on the pins, and we should be good to go. Okay, as mentioned earlier, the pads, they just slide right in. On your guides, put the bottom in first, line the top up and give it a little press. And you see it slides right in. And of course, just want to mention again, the inner pad, remember, that's the one that has the 2 humps on it. So you don't want it on the outside, you want that on the inside for the pistons. Okay, let's get the caliper installed and carry on. Okay, so now we got our caliper mounted back onto the caliper mounted bracket. And we're going to torque the upper and lower bolts for the caliper mounted to 42 foot-pounds. That's the lower. That's the upper. And one thing I want to note here too, for the brake line mounting bracket, I already installed that. And then this little cable that goes for your speed sensor, which we mentioned about earlier, that just presses right in, as such. Okay, so we're going to check the reservoir of the master cylinder, close the lid up tight on the master cylinder reservoir, pump the brakes up, make sure everything's tight, and then we're going to go do the other side, and we'll call it a day. Stay tuned. Okay, final check before road test. Our fluid level is at max. I did not have to add anything. Once I retracted the pistons, all the fluid level came up to the proper level. Cap is on nice and tight. Both tires are now on, torqued to 150 foot-pounds. So let's take her for a road test and see how she performs. Well, just completed my road test and very, very pleased. Great stopping power. There's no more pulsations at high speeds when braking. And needless to say, that's a sexy looking rotor in there now too. So, hope you folks enjoyed watching me put front brakes and rotors on my 2018 Ford Expedition. Please like the channel, share it. Any comments, let me know. But I appreciate all of you, and have a wonderful, blessed day, and God blessings to you all.